Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we're actually talking about the presidential election, but we are not actually going to dive into the tech of this because quite frankly, I think there are more fun ways to predict a presidential election. Now, I basically got this, and I'm going to be full disclosure here. This is not my work. I'm going to be crediting Michael Smerconish of SiriusXM and CNN fame, as well as his producer TC and his editor James, who I've had the privilege of working with. Full disclosure, I've published quite a few articles for Smerconish's website, but I heard a segment actually on his radio show this morning as I try to tune in when I get the chance, and it was so interesting. I actually had to stop what I was doing and start jotting down all of these notes. Because we all know that we can go to a CNN or a Fox News or Quinnipiac or Rasmussen or 538 and get all of this polling data from all of this scientific and data analytics engines, if you will, artificial intelligence, and on and on and on. And they will quantify this scientifically to say statistically who has what percent chance of winning any kind of election, in this case, the presidential election. And I think that that is a really interesting thing. I look at that quite a bit. But there have been some other really interesting and fun ways, ranging from almost science to just absolutely ridiculous. And I wanted to list these out for you. And again, I heard this on his radio show this morning, so please do not think I did the homework here, because they did. Now, as a primer, before we dive in, let's talk real quick about the data analytics and science prediction right now. We'll use 538 for that as our baseline. They tend to be pretty accurate with their polling. And so they have said that right now, President Trump has a 10% chance of winning the election, meaning a 1 in 10 shot if the election is run 10 times. So with that, here are some of the more interesting non-scientific ways that a winner can be predicted for this election, courtesy of the Michael Smerconish radio program. The first one is actually the betting markets. People are betting on these things, and I just heard that a British man bet $5 million that Donald Trump would actually win the election. But this is what the betting markets are saying. They are more accurate, apparently, 4 years ago, betting basically Trump over Hillary than they were the actual polling, meaning they were more accurate than the polling. And right now, the money says that President Trump has a 40% chance of winning the presidency. Obviously, that's way more than the 10% that the scientific polls are basically saying. So maybe humans betting on the market are giving President Trump way more credit than he deserves, or maybe that is more accurate. We're going to find out when all is said and done. The next one is a little town called Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, and I've actually been watching them thanks to my parents since decades ago. They are basically a town of anywhere from, let's say, 5 to 30 people or so that on midnight of the presidential election, they vote, and they consider themselves the first in the nation to vote. And so the saying goes, where Dixville Notch goes, so goes the nation. They have been rather hit or miss. Last year, they predicted for Hillary, but by a slim margin. And obviously, we know the 2016 turnout. This year, they predicted a 5-0 win for Vice President Biden, essentially showing as a rebuke for President Trump, because the down ballot votes for Senate and Congress were mixed between the voters for Republican and Democrat. So we'll see where that goes. But 5-0, Biden wins that. Now, just up the road next to them is another small town called Mills Field, and in this case, they went 16-5 for Donald Trump. So we're going to see what happens. Dixville Notch is considered a little more liberal than Mills Field, and so here we are. So we'll see if any of those two are indicators. Moving on, there's actually a guy, and I've been following his work since the 2008 election between John McCain and Barack Obama. Obviously, Barack Obama became President Obama in that election, but he has created something called 13 Keys to the White House that has predicted every single election correctly since 1984, including the 2016 election, and he doubled down when the Access Hollywood tape near the end of the election came out, basically putting then candidate Trump in a lot of hot water. Alan Lichtman doubled down, still predicting a Trump win, and sure enough, he did. Right now, the 13 keys say that there are 7 against President Trump, which means right now, Alan Lichtman is essentially predicting that Vice President Biden will win the election. And so here we are. Now, statisticians like Nate Silver hate this model because they say it's not grounded in the science and the data, but He's predicted everything so far since 1984, and so we'll see where we go. Here we are. Moving on, let's get a little interesting, and let's go over to Israel, because we are talking about the oracles of Israel. Now, a Tel Aviv newspaper that has closely aligned with Prime Minister Netanyahu hired astrologists, numerologists, and palm readers, and they unanimously predicted that Donald Trump would get another term. So President Trump will be the winner, according to the astrologists, numerologists, and palm readers, the Israeli oracles. Moving on from that, we have the Scholastic presidential poll, and these are usually of students. Most of them are too young to actually vote, but here they are, voting for it on an online poll, and according to them, Biden will win. Now, here's the interesting part. Their predictions have mirrored the outcome of every single election accurately since 1940, except for 3 different elections. Dewey over Truman, Nixon over Kennedy, and in 2016, Clinton over Trump. And so it's interesting because there's been studies that have done by this that show, and Smirkanish mentioned this on the radio show as well, that if people are lying, if adults are lying, saying, well, I'm not supporting Trump or I'm not supporting Biden, and they secretly are, kids tend to be a lot more honest. And so this might be a reflection of parents voting, and I think that's a pretty interesting thing. But Scholastic presidential poll of students says Joe Biden to win. Moving on, let's talk about Johnny Brock's Dungeon in St. Louis, Missouri. Yes, this is an actual place, and yes, they've been tracking it for the last 30 years through Halloween mask sales. Whichever candidate basically has more masks sold is the candidate that will win the election. And this year, 66% of all masks were Trump, 34% were Biden. So Trump, according to them, will win the election. Moving on, let's talk about the Washington Redskins, which I believe is now called the Washington Football Team or something along those lines. But anyway, it's known as the Washington Redskins rule, and here it basically, here's what it states. If they win their last home game before the election, then the incumbent party stays in power. Now, the only time this hasn't been incorrect is in the 2004 election, when George W. Bush defeated Kerry to win a second term. This year, they beat the Cowboys, apparently, so they now predict that President Trump will win by this model. And not to be outdone by football, baseball has the World Series rule. Now, from 1952 to 1976, if the American League, the representative of the American League won the series, then the Republican candidate won the election. If the National League wins the series, it indicates a Democrat win. Now, it broke down in the 80s and 90s, apparently, but has come back as a predictor, and therefore the Los Angeles Dodgers winning, and they are in the National League. Now, Biden is predicted to win thanks to the World Series baseball rule. The next one is who's taller. Taller candidates tend to fare better in polls and everything else, winning the popular vote two-thirds of the time, and the electoral college more than half. Trump is 6'3", Biden is 6'0". Therefore, predictably, Donald Trump should be winning another election. Now, it doesn't always hold true. So, for the record, Barack Obama was taller than John McCain, but he was 1 inch shorter than Mitt Romney, and obviously President Obama beat Mitt Romney in 2012, so there you go. Excuse me. Moving on, let's talk about the cookie poll from Lockel's Bakery in Hatboro, Pennsylvania. Yes, this is an actual thing. Trump cookies are vastly outselling Biden cookies by a margin of 6-1, and therefore they predict Donald Trump will win the election. Moving on, we're going to head over to Siberia in scenic Russia. Yes, because Russian bears and tigers are predicting the election as well. Now, the Royal Rocher-Regev Zoo made headlines in 2016 when a polar bear named Phoenix called it for Donald Trump. This year, a bear and a tiger were given watermelons with the faces of the two candidates on it, and both of them chose Biden. I'm sure Vladimir Putin is thrilled about that, but heads up, the Siberian bears and tigers believe Biden will win the election. Moving on, and finally, and this is my favorite because, man, a squirrel in North Carolina. This is Chris, the election predicting squirrel. Now, here's what happens. They fill 2 different bowls and each bowl has a candidate's name on it, and then they put hazelnuts in it, and whichever bowl, Chris, the election predicting squirrel, and I love that, it should be a band name, whichever bowl Chris eats from is the winner of the election. And who did Chris predict? Donald Trump. So there you go. I thought this was going to be some just lighthearted fun because we are all bracing for impact on what is a contentious election, but this is, I think, a more ridiculous look on how to predict the winners. And again, I have to thank Michael Smerconish's producer TC and his editor James for putting this together. I'm sure my rendition of this compared to Michael Smerconish fails in comparison, but I think my audience would really appreciate that. And everybody should go watch it. I'm not going to do my normal preamble because I'm going to give them credit. You should go to smerconish.com. They've got some amazing articles there, as well as mine. You can read my articles there as well. And you should check him out on SiriusXM. And he's on Saturday mornings on CNN as well. It's a great show if you like political commentary that's way more down the middle and not really partisan. I think he does a good job of that. So there you go. Those are your predictions, for today. And if you want to predict in any which way, shape, or form, please feel free to reply to any one of these posts or videos on any platform and let me know who you think is going to win. All I ask is that we be respectful because at the end of the day, we all have to live together. And so that is your video/podcast of the day. Thanks, everyone.